Today we have good news in the motorcycle world because the Urban GS is back. They're not actually calling this the Urban GS, but that's essentially what it is. If you remember back in the day with the old R9T, they had a scrambler, slightly more rugged off-roady version of the bike available. And now with the new R12, they've got a GS version of it. So they're calling this the R12 GS. If we look at the photo here, you can see a very familiar color scheme to one of the most memorable color schemes that they had on the Urban GS back in the day. And right now we're looking at the new bike. If I flip to this next photo, this is the old Urban GS. And looking back and forth between the two, obviously there's a lot of similarities. We've got a very high mount fender. We've got laced spoked wheels. Again, that very similar color scheme. We've got a very similar looking headlight cowl and a few different off-road features, but this new bike does a few things differently from the old school Urban GS. The old Urban GS had these big knee indents on the tank. It had this big aluminum piece underneath the seat. It had a little bit more of a large and complicated exhaust design. The new bike streamlines things a little bit, makes it look a little bit more modern and smoothed out. And I think that they've done a really good job with the design on this motorcycle. It was always one of the highlight things about the Urban GS is that visually it was set apart very much from the rest of the R9Ts. And I would say this R12 GS definitely sets itself apart from the other R12s that you can get. There are going to be, of course, mechanically a lot of similarities between the new R12 GS and the other R12 models that you can get out there. So we have an 1170cc Boxer engine, air and oil cooled, 109 horsepower, 85 pound-feet of torque. That's all pretty standard. 6-speed transmission, shaft drive, all the things that we've come to expect from these bikes from BMW. One of the things that they have made some tweaks on, though, is the suspension, as you would expect from a motorcycle of this sort, one that's made to do at least a little bit of light off-roading, if not some real adventure riding. So we've got fully adjustable suspension front and rear. Always a nice thing to have, especially on a motorcycle that's in this premium end of the price category. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But travel, 8.2 inches of travel from the forks and 7.8 inches of travel from the rear shock. So a decent amount of travel as well as pretty decent ground clearance, 9.4 inches, which is not bad. That being said, this is an off-roadish bike. We'll call it a rugged bike. I would say that this is more of a scrambler maybe than a traditional ADV, but it is on the heavy side because it's based on a big 1200cc street bike. 505 pounds is the wet weight. So if you're planning to take one of these on some serious single track, then you are bolder than I. And I don't doubt that that's possible at all. But 505 pounds is tipping the scales a little bit on the heavy side for really intense technical off-roading. However, a bike like this should be perfectly comfortable cruising down some fire roads, and it's one that, fingers crossed, we'll get a chance to ride at some point soon here, because I didn't even get a chance to ride the old Urban GS, and that was a motorcycle on my short list of brand new bikes that I would consider buying, so it'll be the same here. For some more of the components that you get on this motorcycle, we've got a 21-inch front wheel as standard, which is once again a good thing that we want to see on a motorcycle that has at least some intentions of doing off-road riding. And a 17-inch rear wheel is standard, but there is an enduro package you can get for this bike to get yourself an 18-inch rear wheel instead, which might be a little better suited to some trail riding. And if you get that package, it does seem like it comes with a slightly more aggressive tire as well. For brakes, we've got twin 310mm discs in the front and a 265mm disc in the rear. And there's a few different colors that you can get on these bikes as well. So far, we've been kind of focused on this red, white, and blue color scheme because it's one of the ones that stands out more. There is also, I'm calling it boring black. That's not what BMW calls it, obviously, because that would be a really bad marketing strategy for one of your color schemes. But of the three color options that you can get on this R12 GS, I would say it's pretty much hands down, I don't care who you are or who you ask, the least interesting color scheme that you can get. The other color scheme you can get for this bike is a mix of a sort of tan with some red accents, red on the frame, which looks pretty cool, as well as quite a bit of black, especially integrated into the seat. And actually, we've got all three of the color scheme components built into the seat design as well on this. So this tan, red and black, pretty good looking color scheme. But if it were my money and me speccing out one of these bikes, that red, white, and blue color scheme they did on the past in the Urban GS is one of the things that made this motorcycle stand out in my mind and make me remember it. And I like it a lot on this as well. Now, we've also got a few different riding modes that these bikes can be switched into. The standard ones are road, rain, and enduro. But as an option, you can get an Enduro Pro riding mode. And this leads me into talking about options on this new R12 GS because there are quite a few of them. So quick shifter, that's one thing that you can get optionally. The other one that strikes me as being a little bit strange is that standard this motorcycle has an analog gauge in the center of the handlebars. A little old school and a little simple and low tech, especially considering the price point that we're looking at here, closing in on $20,000. I would kind of expect a TFT, and funny enough, you can option a TFT on this, but I have to wonder why that doesn't come standard. For a motorcycle in this price point, I would kind of expect to get a TFT, so I find it interesting that they're giving you just an analog gauge from the get-go. That being said, there are a lot of tech features and rider aids that you do get as a standard part of this bike. Rider aids like traction control, a good ABS system, and even a keyless system that lets you jump on the bike, start it up, and go without having to take that key out of your pocket. Those are some nice things to have, but there's a few other things that you can also option on the bike, like tire pressure monitoring, and a few different features you can hand select if those are specific things that you want. Starting price on this bike is specifically right around $17,000 once you factor in destination. Of course, if you go to a dealership and buy one of these R12 GSs, there's also going to be some fees depending on whatever dealership you're going into, so price out the door is likely going to be a little bit more than $17,000, which places this motorcycle squarely in the category of being a premium priced bike. I don't think there's any way around that. It is a pretty big displacement bike. It's got a good amount of power. It comes standard with a fair bit of tech. My only real gripe is I do wish it came standard with a TFT. I just don't think that that's that big of an ask on a motorcycle of this sort when you're paying almost $20,000 from the get-go. But really small gripes because it is something that you can spec. If you're really married to having a TFT and you want that bit of tech, you can do it. This is a motorcycle that's in BMW's heritage category of bikes with the R18. So maybe some people out there might argue that an analog gauge kind of suits the old school style of this bike. But to me, this is a modern enough looking motorcycle with LED lighting and a very smooth, minimalist, modern appearance that I would like to see it with a TFT from the get-go. But enough harping on that. I also want to say, before we wrap up this video, a quick thanks to Scott and the team over at Rider Justice. We've been working with them since around when this channel started out. And if you're ever in an accident and you need legal representation, whether it's something that happened on your bike or on four wheels, make sure you call Scott and the team first. And you can check out their link down below. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. BMW has been doing some pretty cool models here with the R12. So this GS, obviously this is the newest edition, but in the past we did as well do a video on the R12S, which is kind of more of a cafe racer style. There's also the R12 9T or standard R12. So they've got a few different versions of this bike that they're coming out with, which is cool because the old R9T was always a motorcycle that you could have in a lot of different flavors and it could look a lot of different ways, whether it was the old Scrambler or the old R9T cafe racer style bike that they did in the past. Seeing some of these models come back makes me hopeful for the future of the R12. And these are all bikes that I would still love to get a chance to throw a leg over and spend some time on because this is definitely the category of motorcycle that appeals to me as a rider and the age demographic that I'm in. a lot of them are just a little bit outside of a price bracket that would let me have one of them in my garage. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Is this R12 GS enough to get any of you out to a dealership to want to buy one or at least give one a test ride? That's all for this video, and we'll see you in the next.